This is Jenny Kunkel, and in this video we are going to walk through Chapter 1, Programming Challenge for Additional Practice. This is going to be your first Java program. This is from the Pearson eText for starting out with Java, from control structures through objects. This is going to be where we do our Hello World program. This is typical of most programming languages that you start out with a Hello World application, and this is going to be our version of it using IntelliJ. So let's go ahead and get started with IntelliJ and creating that Hello World application. Before we open our IntelliJ IDEA development environment, first thing that we want to do is we want to create a directory that we can place all of the projects that we create in IntelliJ for the semester in that one folder. I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. I'm going to call this folder Workspace. This is a throwback. This is a throwback to the early days of Eclipse, where they would have a folder called Workspace that you would use, that you would place everything within. So we're going to use that as the area that we place all of our projects that we create this semester in IntelliJ. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize my File Explorer. If you haven't already done so, open up IntelliJ. You should be sitting at a screen. Notice I cleaned up this a little bit so I don't have so much out there. I do want to keep this link so I remember where I've placed some code for our robotics team. But we're going to go ahead and create a new project. We're going to click on the project, and we're going to kind of use the premise here that we're going to call the class My First Program. We're going to then also essentially name our project My First Application to go along with that. So My First Application. We're going to change to the location using the browser option here. If it's not already on Workspace, you can change it to your location that has that folder defined. I'm going to say OK there. Next week, we'll talk about how we can use our Get repository. Our build system that we want to use, at least initially, is going to be IntelliJ. Later on, we may get into Maven, but right now we're going to stick with IntelliJ. Make sure that your JDK is visible. If it's not, go through, pick it if you have one in the list. Otherwise, download the JDK. Once you have that installed, then it should populate. We're going to go ahead and create the project. And when we get started here, there's nothing here in the screen. We have some files that are part of the IntelliJ environment underneath the .idea. We have our source folder, and that's where we place all of our code that we write. And we have our get-ignore in case we would push it to GitHub. We're going to go ahead and add a class. Java is based off of classes. It's an object-oriented language, and that means it's going to have classes within it for everything that we write. We're going to do a new and Java class. This is where we're placing My First Program as our class name. Hit enter, and we have our public class My First Program. That's how we create a class, by using an access modifier. In this case, this is the public. We have the class keyword, and then we have the class name that we've assigned. We're going to go ahead and add to this a method. When we start with a Java console program, we need an entry point, and our entry point is always going to be the main method. And we need to add this method. And one of the nice features about the IntelliJ environment is that it has some shortcuts that we can use. And one of them is for this main method. So if we type in main and double click on the main keyword that pops up, it's going to bring in that method signature for us that we can use and start coding within that body that we have here. So the open curly brace and the closing curly brace, that's the body of our method. It's also going to have an access modifier. In this case, it's public. We have our static keyword. This means that we're going to only have one instance of this regardless of how many objects that a class may be used to create. We're only going to have one instance, and we'll get into that in a lot more detail when we get to classes. Right now, pretty much we're going to be using static methods. That's what we're going to be creating. We have a return type of void, meaning that there's nothing being returned from this method. The name of the method is main, and case sensitive it is. We have to have it lowercase. It has inputs to this method. One of them is a string array. So this is a string with brackets that indicates that that's an array. And we have a variable name for that parameter as args. Now, typically, we're never going to use the args unless we're passing something in through the command line. There's ways to do that, but for our first program, we're not going to really do that. We're going to come down to the next line, and we're going to enter system. This is in the java.lang namespace. I'm going to do an out. We want to use the out, so it's going to give us a bunch of different output type options. So if I put a dot in here, then it's going to bring up the options that are available within the system.out, and we can see that there's a whole bunch of things. Now in our case, typically if we want to write some text out and have a new line character that advances the cursor to the next line, we're going to use the println. If we want to just keep the cursor on the same line after we write out the text, then we would use a print. So we're going to go ahead and look for the println that has a string option. If we find it, we can just double click and it's going to bring it in. We're going to be inside our parentheses, and we can add something here. And maybe we're going to go ahead and add hello world, because that's what they want us to do for this. Putting in our exclamation point. And at this point, if I were to try to run, I would actually be able to do that. It's going to bring up the console window and show me the output for that, which is hello world. It has finished without any errors. We can see the exit code is 0. There's no errors being shown. But what happens, and this is typical, and you may notice that there is a red squiggly here, there's a red squiggly underneath the project name, there's a red squiggly underneath the class name. That is indicative of a syntax error. And this semester, if you turn in code that has syntax errors, you're going to get a 0 on the assignment because that's unacceptable. There's no reason you can't figure out and correct those. There's all kinds of ways that we can do that. If we look here, it's showing us one error. If we click on that red dot, it's going to bring up what the error is. It's going to show us the line number. I can click on it. It should take me to the line in question, and it's telling me that it expected a semicolon. So that's pretty explanatory. I can just enter my semicolon and then everything goes away. We also can do breakpoints and step through code, and we'll get into that when we get more complex programs. But for now, what I want you to do is run your program. Make sure that you have the console window up, you have your code up, and take a screenshot of this where I can see that you're using IntelliJ, that you have your first program, and the results down below. And that would be your submission for the first week's assignment. If you have any questions, if something's not working quite right, please feel free to reach out to me.